Hey everybody, it's Natalie Case again, here to read to you this evening. Um, as I promised, we'll be doing this every Sunday and Wednesday um, at 5:30 p.m. Pacific as we read through my book, Through Shades and Shadows, which looks like this, in case you've never seen it. Oh, silly me. That's what I get for trying to pick it up sideways. I do not know what my tablet is doing. All right. Um, So here we are. We're going to start chapter 2 tonight. This book is told in 2 points of view. All the odd chapters are in Mason's point of view, which we read chapter 1 last week on Wednesday. All of the even chapters are in Alaric's point of view, which we'll be starting chapter 2 today. And because we live in hell times, and I'm a grown-up, so I deserve these things, I have poured myself a glass of wine out of this bottle. This is Daryl Rex Groom, known as DRG. This is a 2018 Pinot Noir. And for those of you who know me, Pinot Noir is my go-to wine. This is one of my favorite Pinots. I buy these through a wine club called Naked Wines. You'll find the link to it over in the description. And if you decide you would like to participate on either my author's page or my website's contact page, and I will send you the invite code, which will get you a voucher for $100 off any case of $159 or more. So, also over in that description, you're going to find the link to the Amazon page for this book, and you will find my PayPal, and my Venmo. I'm obviously I need to drink the wine because my mouth is all conflicted here. But my PayPal and my Venmo, in case you feel like shooting a few pennies this way, you don't need to. This is utterly me entertaining you. However, I am an unemployed author who is looking to keep the lights on and the internet working so that I can do these things for you. So that said, let's jump in and start chapter 2. I think recent events illustrate my point well enough, Councilwoman Bethany Flanders said. Are you suggesting that we should be racic and xenophobic? Anson Lambrecht asked the councilwoman. Alaric touched his father's shoulder in warning. Is it racist to defend yourself against murderers? The councilwoman argued. She bristled and put both hands on the table in front of her. My husband and several other state assemblymen are drafting a bill that would require all shades to register so that they can be monitored. All I am suggesting is that we consider a local ordinance to protect our children. This is not going well, Alaric thought to his father over their psychic connection. Steady, his father replied, his thought warm and familiar. While I recognize that your concern is for the children, I fail to see how the proposed ordinance would do anything more than turn our citizens against one another. Albert looked up at the speaker, caught a little off guard. Townsend Marley was not usually the voice of reason. Councilwoman Flanders held up a file folder. We're talking about people who kill. I got this from Chief Callan. We have 3 bloodless bodies found in 2 weeks. Completely drained of blood, shade symbols carved into their skin. Alaric sat forward, his hand on his father's shoulder. He hadn't heard anything about any shade-related deaths. His father surprised told Alaric he hadn't either. Why is this the first thing that we're hearing of it? Anson asked. She stood a little straighter and lifted her chin defiantly. The police are afraid that if it came out that we had one of these killers here, there would be mass panic. So because we may or may not have a serial killer who may or may not be a shade, our logical response is to put anyone who might possibly be a shade into some ghetto? Next to Councilwoman Flanders, a slight man with almost delicate hands cleared his throat and stood. I believe the point to be made here is that people who are different, who can kill us without a weapon, sorry, my cat is being a goofball, who can kill us without a weapon should be segregated for the protection of our citizens. I would take it a step further and include any person with extra human ability. Alaric sat back in his chair, his eyes on the newest member of the city council. He was a local minister, the kind that had always made him nervous. What exactly do you mean by extra human, Roth? Anson asked, crossing his arms. Alaric could feel his concern and outrage at the idea that Roth might mean them. Alaric did not like the way Roth looked at his father then. I'm sure you are aware, Councilman, that the Bible counsels us to expel evil. Even now, in this age, there are those among us who receive nefarious powers from the devil and use them to ensnare the godly. His father actually snorted. You can't be serious, Reverend. This is a city council, not a church meeting. You've been warned before to leave your religion at the door. 3 months ago, you would have argued that there was no such thing as a shade, Councilman, Roth said, an eyebrow lifting. And yet here we have found that they do exist and that they are evil. If such an evil being with powers beyond our own is real, how can we deny that there are also witches and other beings that can bring about our destruction? So, what? Anson asked. You want to outlaw psychics and herbalists now? The corner of Roth's mouth lifted into a sort of half smile. It would be a start. There was a smugness about him, a sense that he was pleased with his father's objection, but he couldn't know the truth. For generations, his family had kept their secret, their tribe, like the Shades and others, hidden in plain sight, not out of malice, but for self-preservation. Anson shook his head. Alaric looked around the council chambers, mentally trying to tally those who would support the ordinance currently under discussion, which would limit the locations where a shade could legally live. He scanned the surface emotions of those he could, coming back with a nearly 50-50 split, with at least one member of the council still very undecided. He glanced at the clock. There wouldn't be a vote now. The session was nearly over. I suggest we table this discussion until everyone has had a chance to review the ramifications and legality of what is being proposed, Councilman Marley said. Alaric's father nodded. Seconded. Harold Mackey, the recording secretary, held up a hand. All in favor? A chorus of eyes shuffled around the room. So moved. The allotted time for the session is at an end. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Several people raised a hand. Moved and seconded. All in favor? No one waited for him to say approved. As one, they all began standing, turning to aides, and heading for the door. Alaric's father put a hand on his arm, drawing him to the exit. He put his copy of the proposal in Alaric's hands as they headed for the office. Get me numbers. Alaric nodded, holding the door for his father. Should I tell Mom we're going to be late? Anson smiled and nodded. She knows. An aide for one of the other councilmen came running toward them. Turn on the news, right now. Alaric darted around his father and turned on the television in his office. The screen came to life, instantly filling with flames as a voice tried to relay what was happening. We are in downtown Sacramento right now, where a fire is blazing after witnesses say that 5 men claiming to be the 8th Battalion beat a man and dragged him into this building, where they reportedly set the man on fire. Alaric sank into the chair, his stomach tightening as his father moved to stand beside him. He could feel the comfort his father was sending his way, but underneath it, he could feel his father's own fear. We have received footage that is supposedly from the 8th Battalion, a militia group that has taken credit for several attacks across the U.S. I warn you that this footage is graphic. The burning building faded, and in its place was shaky footage of 4 men in navy blue from head to toe, ski masks obscuring their faces as they dragged the bloody man back to a column in a dark building where they stood him up and tied him up. We are the 8th Battalion. We are the mighty right hand of God. This is justice. 2 of the men doused the man with liquid from gas cans, trailing a puddle away from him. A 3rd man lit the puddle as they all jumped back. Screams filled the air as the fire raced up the man's body. Alaric looked away from the screen as his hand found the button to turn the screen off. That's right here, Alaric said to his father. I think it's time to go home, Alaric, Anson said, his hand warm on Alaric's shoulder. We can work on this tomorrow. Alaric nodded, standing slowly. Thanks, Allison. She nodded. I thought you should know. Tell your mother that the preserves were appreciated, Anson said as Allison started to leave, and we'll have you over to dinner sometime next week. He shut the door behind her and turned to Alaric. Perhaps we should call a meeting. Things are starting to get hot. Alaric nodded. I'm starting to think that maybe Riley was right. None of them wanted to believe that things could get as bad as Riley had seen them in his premonition. But each day something new happened to make him wonder. He felt his mother reaching for him, her thoughts warmly caressing against his shields as she checked in to make sure they were okay. He returned the affection as he gathered his things. His father joined the link, and for a moment they just shared in the familial bond before information was relayed and his father reached out for the other members of his clan. They left the office then, needing no words, as they made their way to the car and headed for home. It would be a tense night for all of them. And that would be Freya saying hello. We have to be prepared for where this is going, Riley said, his voice quiet but intense. Riley James had married into the family a year before. He was younger than Alaric by about 5 years. The product of a mixed marriage, Riley's mother was a Vodun priestess from Ghana. His father, a police officer in Virginia, who was a part of the clan. His skin was a soft brown, his eyes a deep dark blue. His hair changed often, but it was currently dyed blonde and gelled into spikes. His gift was not the most active, but it was strong. It had been Riley who first suggested that the current tensions would lead to war, and that their kind would be among the casualties of that war. We don't know what's going on, Brian countered from his place near the door. Brian Wagner was one of his father's best friends. They'd known each other since they were kids. His chin was covered with dark blonde hair that was shot through with gray. His skin was deeply tanned, all but the stark white of the scar that ran from his hairline down onto his cheek and into his beard. He was a good 15 years older than Alaric, and together they were two of his father's 3 keepers. Alaric glanced across at the third of those keepers. She was older than all of them, a distant cousin with a depth of gifts he couldn't begin to guess at. Victoria Olsen was the epitome of what he supposed a wise woman looked like. Her long silver hair hung in braids, and her colorful clothes were as playful as the sparkle in her eye. Alaric had known her since he was 4 or 5, and she never ceased to surprise him. Her gifts were plentiful, but never on display, and she was known to be as wise in the ways of herbs and stones as she was in her counsel. Victoria raised an eyebrow at him, and Alaric smiled. As keepers, they shared a fairly intimate bond, but he didn't want to intrude, so he withdrew. We need to watch our step, Alaric's father said beside him. Riley's premonition seems to be pretty close to the truth. That has never been the most reliable of gifts, Brian said. We've worked hard to pull this clan back together. I don't want to see us run off by a vision that may or may not come true. You want to wait until the person burned alive is one of us? Riley asked, his hand coming to rest on his wife's shoulder. The only child of Alaric's aunt, Abigail, was only 22 and was nearly 6 months pregnant with their first child. Of all of them, she was the only one who was publicly known for her gifts, making a living as a psychic, reading charms and palms out of the parlor of the house she'd inherited from her mother, and sometimes from a local metaphysical shop. The 8th Battalion is a problem, even if they haven't turned their eye our way. It's pretty clear my fellow council members have, however, Anson said. Tonight, Reverend Roth suggested that his proposed ordinance should apply to more than shades. It isn't just here, either, Victoria said, her sharp eyes sweeping the room. The winds bring news of violence erupting all over. This business with the shade murderer has only opened a door to a very dark place, and that darkness has found its way out. Brian crossed his arms and leaned back against the door. The racism isn't new. The face of the man who had been killed filled Alaric's mind, the footage playing as though he was back in his father's office watching it. He could almost feel the pain as the flames caught. He turned away, trying to keep his discomfort from derailing the conversation. Perhaps it isn't new, Victoria said, but once it was shoved behind a door and we tried to pretend it was gone. I don't want to be the one to say that it isn't our fight, Brian said. Yes, you do, Anson answered with a shake of his head, but you're wrong. Bigots seldom focus on just one group of people, and when it gets dressed up in religion, we're all fair game. Roth made it pretty clear tonight that he wants to see anyone his religion brands as evil contained, at the least, Alaric said, pushing the fiery image in his head away. Roth made it pretty clear tonight. I said that already, sorry. But Roth is a councilman, not a member of these militias that are committing the violence, Brian insisted. You sure about that? Alaric asked. He licked his lips and drew in a deep breath before glancing at his father. You've been quiet so far, Anson said. Speak your mind. When you asked him if he wanted to outlaw psychics and herbalists tonight, his reaction was, it was like you validated something for him. He's hiding a lot more than he's showing. Did you read him? Riley asked. Alaric shook his head. No, just surface stuff, emotions. I wasn't close enough, and I'm not sure I want to read beyond the surface with him. I think we need to be vigilant, and we need to be prepared, Anson said. I will be increasing my time with the globe, see if I can spot trouble coming. I want the rest of you to be alert too, and if you see something, tell us. Alaric sensed his mother's approach and turned to her as the room slowly emptied out. She smiled and took his hand. Her touch was soothing. She was worried. He didn't need to read her to know that. When the room was empty but for his parents and himself, Alaric sighed and tried to stifle a yawn. His father was going to go out into the yard, to the grove of trees where the orb waited. It was one of the few remaining artifacts of their ancient tribe in existence. It was a source of energy, a means of connection. The appointed leader of the tribe could use it to instantly reach any and all with gifts, no matter where they were. Since his father had taken on the mantle to lead the tribe, they had used it to unite the displaced families, bringing them together in a way the tribe hadn't known in over a century. His father had been chosen because he was one of the few remaining with the bloodline that went back to the old world, back to a time when their tribe had been whole. Anson had inherited the role from his uncle, and he had chosen Alaric to stand with him, although at the time Alaric had barely been an adult. Nearly 7 years had passed since that day when he stood with Brian and Victoria to support his father's initiation. Alaric had learned a lot since then. In some ways, the ritual had connected him to the others, had opened him up, brought his gifts to the fore. He'd been a skilled empath even then, though he seldom exerted influence, preferring to use his gifts to gather information. It made him good at reading people, at seeing through lies. But in the years since the ritual, his ability to read far more than emotions had become stronger. His father saw it as a sign that Alaric would follow him as leader. It was part of why he delegated authority to Alaric regularly, hoping he would become familiar with the work of leading the tribe. As his mother walked his father out into the yard, Alaric turned for his room. They had been a fractured tribe, scattered across the world, the gifts waning as they intermarried with those without gifts. Since his childhood, Alaric had helped his mother trace the lines, contacting people, offering them connection, family. Some had moved to be closer, and they had begun training again. Together, he and his mother had designed a series of tests to help determine which gifts were strongest in those that came to them wanting to learn. Using the knowledge his father collected from the memories of the ancestors, they were building customized courses of study and intensive practical trainings. He sat at his desk and ran a hand over his face. All of it could come crashing down around them. He'd been skeptical when Riley told them of his vision. As Brian said, precognition was never the most reliable of their many gifts. The future was always in motion, and telling the future was like trying to pin it in place. But he was starting to feel like, just maybe, Riley's vision of the future was closer to true than any of them wanted it to be. There you go, chapter 2. We will return to Mason's point of view on Wednesday, when we read chapter 3. In the meantime, I raise a glass to you. I hope that you're enjoying your Sunday, whether you're celebrating Easter or not, and that you and your family are safe and healthy and will remain that way. Stay home, stay safe, wear your masks, wash your hands. I love you all. Bye.